You know the stereotype of the loner, right? The outcast, the one who's a little bit broken, who just can't seem to connect. But what if that entire picture is completely wrong? What if, according to the legendary psychologist Carl Jung, the people who walk alone aren't damaged at all? What if they're actually the most psychologically formidable people in the room? It's a pretty radical idea, and it flips everything we think we know about society on its head.
And Jung, well, he didn't pull any punches. He basically said the real psychological problem isn't the person who chooses to be alone. The real sickness is a society that demands everyone perform constantly in these often toxic social situations. Just that one thought. It forces you to question what it even means to be well-adjusted.
All right, first up, let's just dive right into the huge gap between how society sees the loner and what Jung actually discovered. And this isn't just a small disagreement, it's a complete 180. And this is where you can really see the clash. Society slaps on these labels, right? Antisocial, broken, damaged. But Jung saw something totally different. He saw people who were basically immune to groupthink. Individuals who had built up this kind of psychological armor that made them incredibly formidable. To him, this wasn't damage, it was evolution. So, that leads to the big question. Why? Why are they so different? What's going on inside their heads? Well, Jung's work suggests they aren't just running a different program. They're on an entirely different operating system, one that isn't even connected to the main network most of us are on. Let's take a look at what that network actually is.
So here's this huge idea, the collective unconscious. For Jung, this is like an invisible current that just pulls most of humanity along. It's all the unspoken rules about how you should dress, what job you should want, how you're supposed to act at a party. It's this powerful force that most people are guided by without even realizing they're chained to it.
And that really brings it back home, doesn't it? I mean, just think about it for a second. When was the last time you made a choice, big or small, based on what you thought other people would think? We all do it, constantly. We've kind of handed over the controls to these invisible judges. The loner, they just don't. They never plugged into that system to begin with.
And this really shows their unique position. See, they're not socially awkward, they're hyper-perceptive. While everyone else is on stage, performing their social roles, the loner is sitting in the audience, just watching. They see the little contradictions, the machinery behind the masks, the patterns of behavior that everyone else is too busy to notice. They have this incredibly high form of social intelligence, but it's the intelligence of an observer, which makes actually jumping on stage and participating feel, well, kind of impossible. This brings us to what might be the most important idea in this entire explainer. The critical difference between the pain of loneliness and the power of solitude. Because believe me, they are not the same thing.
This is the absolute key. Loneliness is a feeling of lack, a painful craving for a connection you can't find. It's suffering. But solitude, for the loner, that's a superpower. It is a chosen state. It doesn't feel empty, it feels full. It's where they can finally get some clarity, some relief from the exhausting performance of everyday social life.
Exactly. For this type of person, all the small talk and social rituals that seem to comfort most people, it just feels like static on a clear channel. It drains their energy because they're constantly analyzing the huge gap between what people are saying and what they actually mean. Solitude isn't just a preference, it's a necessity for psychological survival.
And it's in that solitude, in that quiet, that the really deep work happens. Without the constant distraction of the group, the loner is forced to confront the parts of themselves that most people spend their entire lives running away from.
Jung had a name for this, the shadow. It's basically everything we don't want to admit about ourselves. The group is the perfect hiding place for it, right? You can always point fingers at someone else's flaws. But when you're alone, there's no one to project onto. You are forced to meet yourself, all of yourself.
And look at the path this creates. By facing their own shadow, the loner starts to accept their full humanity, the good, the bad, all of it. This process actually makes them immune to shame being used as a weapon against them. I mean, if you've already faced the worst parts of yourself and made peace with them, what threat can anyone really hold over you? The result is this unshakable internal stability. So, this brings us to the final and maybe the most explosive part of this whole journey. What happens when a person becomes this psychologically sovereign, and why is that kind of freedom so terrifying to the group? Because this is the end result. A person who can't be blackmailed, who can't be shamed, who can't be controlled by all the normal social pressures that keep everyone else in line. They are, in a word, free. And that kind of freedom is a radical threat to any system that's built on control.
And what does that look like in the real world? Well, it looks like this. It's the whistleblower who can't be silenced by threats to their reputation. It's the person in the family who finally calls out the dysfunction everyone else pretends isn't there. These are the people who can walk away from toxic jobs or relationships because their self-worth isn't tied to being included.
So when you boil it all down, here's the truth. The loner isn't running faulty code. They're the ones who looked at the standard societal download that most of us run on autopilot, and they rejected it. They went through the incredibly difficult process of writing their own code, their own operating system. Now, that makes them incompatible with the mainstream, for sure, but it also makes them capable of seeing things the rest of us just can't.
And so that leaves us with one last, really big question to think about. What Jung's work suggests is that true psychological freedom, true sovereignty, might only be found on the other side of a journey most of us are too scared to even begin. The journey into solitude. The question is, what price are you willing to pay for your own freedom?